I actually have three titles for my program tonight. The first is printed in your bulletin, Jesus and Darwin, How the Marriage of Science and Religion Can Transform Your Life or Can Change Your Life. But I also used two other titles with this program. Evolutionize Your Life, Heaven is Coming Home to Reality, and Religious Naturalism, an Inspiring Vision of Humanity's Future. And the little secret is, it doesn't matter what is asked for. It's the same program. Here's the side of our van where we have the Jesus and Darwin fish kissing with hearts between them, and we definitely get some interesting looks in this part of the world. The first time that we were in Lawrence, Kansas, a biology professor looked at the side of the van and he goes, "Oh, great, you just piss everybody off." It certainly sometimes seems that way. What I'll be speaking on this evening is how our best evidential understanding of three things: big history, death and chaos, and human nature. That when we have our best evidence, our best scientific understanding, humanity's collective intelligence about these three things, we can have a deeply inspiring vision of the future that can wake us up excited to co-create and work with each other and work with people who think very differently than us towards a common, healthy, just, sustainably life-giving future. The question that'll frame my presentation this evening is, what is religion? This picture, by the way, is me at the bottom of Angel Falls. This falls goes 115 feet up. This is in the Grand Canyon. A year and a half ago, Connie and I rafted down the Grand Canyon for a week. Is religion supernatural otherworldlyism? Is that all religion is? Is it about the unnatural realm? I suggest to you no, that religions are maps of reality. There's not a single religion anywhere in the world that isn't a map of what's real and what's important, or how things are and which things matter. That if you align your life, if you guide your life by that map, you'll experience personal wholeness and social coherence. All religions do that. And they also provide consistent access to the feeling states that humans have always needed to thrive. No matter where you've lived throughout human history, we don't thrive if all we can do is look to the future with fear. We do thrive when we can look to the future with trust. We don't thrive if all we can do is look to the past with resentment or guilt. We do thrive when we can look to the past with gratitude. In fact, that's part of what therapy is about, is helping people re-story their past. And then we don't thrive if we're overwhelmed by the challenges in the moment. We do thrive when we're inspired to be in action, whatever the challenges may be. Because as we all know, compost happens. It's just part of life. So how do we stay inspired to be in action, whatever the challenges? Now, one of the things that science has given us, to use religious language, one of the things that God has been revealing to us through evidence, through science, is a larger, more expanded understanding of history, human nature, and death and chaos. This picture here is from Apollo 8. It was the first picture of Earth from the moon. And then we go expanding a little bit out. Have any of you seen this picture before? This is one of my favorite images. This is a picture of a solar eclipse. We sent a spaceship on the other side of Saturn looking back towards the Earth and towards the sun, and the sun is directly behind Saturn. There's no color touch-up. This is a photo. And you see that little dot right there? Guess what that is? That's planet Earth. We're looking through the rings of Saturn and able to see Earth in the distance. Talk about a perspective shift, right? Now, of course, moving further out, this is our closest neighbor galaxy. Until 1924, we didn't know that anything was larger than the Milky Way. We thought the Milky Way was the entire universe. And then in 1924, Edwin Hubble was able to discern that there were other galaxies. And now we know that our Milky Way is only one of like 200 billion other galaxies. And then, of course, this is the Hubble Deep Field photo. Each of these is a galaxy. Some of these are 9 or 10 billion light years away. And as an old mentor of mine, this old farmer at my first church, he was an astronomer, an amateur astronomer. He said, "You know, Reverend," he said, "the more I learn about this awesome universe, the more awesome my God becomes." In fact, if this understanding doesn't expand and deepen our theological concepts, we're not up to date with what's being revealed through science. As I said before, trust, gratitude, and inspiration are the core feeling states that humans have needed to thrive. And for all of human history, the way that people got these was beliefs. All different cultures had different beliefs, different pre-natural stories that helped us get to trust, gratitude, and inspiration. And now we have knowledge that gets us there. But it does so not at the expense of the religious traditions. It doesn't diss or put down the religious traditions. It's helping the religious traditions themselves to evolve. That'll become clear later on. So this concept of big history, the history of everyone and everything, it's physical evolution, biological evolution, and cultural evolution as one common creation story. It's one of the most exciting academic disciplines. In fact, I've mentioned it a couple times already today. If you just put big history, Bill Gates, in Google, you'll get Bill Gates is evangelistic about big history. But one of the core concepts is this notion of nested emergence. I've got the nesting dolls because this understanding that we now have through science of nested creativity. Subatomic particles are within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, within planets, within galaxies. At all nested levels, every level can create. Every level can bring something new into existence that didn't exist before. Stars are creative. They create the periodic table of elements. But molecules in community are also creative. Hydrogen and oxygen come together, water's created. So creativity, divine creativity, exists at all nested levels. And from this vantage point, God, or the goddess, or Allah, or any other sacred name for ultimate reality is a proper name, a sacred name for that one and only creative reality that transcends every other reality, yet also includes every other reality. Here we have a visual image of this greater complexity, greater interdependence, and greater cooperation at larger and at wider scale. This is the nested emergence part. We see greater complexity emerging out of lesser complexity. And this is not debated. There's no scientists in the world that would debate this and say that theocracies came before Neolithic villages or mammals came before multicellular life. No, this is considered knowledge. Human cooperation once existed only within small family groups. Cooperative organizations expanded to produce multifamily bands, then tribes, then agricultural villages, cities, and empires, then nation states. Now, some forms of economic and social cooperation span the globe. Now, one of the things that I consider gospel, that is saving good news, is when we understand how this has occurred, the mechanisms. For example, formerly independent, or in some cases even competitive entities, face some crisis, some challenge, some chaos, some difficulty. And they figure out or stumble into the awareness that they can survive together better than they can independently. And when they figure out how to align the self-interest of the parts with the well-being of the whole, a new level of complexity emerges. Now let's call these tribes. Before you had families and clans, right? Now you got a bunch of tribes interacting. They face some crisis, some challenge, some chaos, some difficulty. They figure out how to align the self-interest of each tribe with a new level of complexity, and a chiefdom or a kingdom emerges. Now you got a bunch of chiefdoms and kingdoms, and so on. This is how the world has become as complex as it is. This is how prokaryotic bacteria created the eukaryotic cell. This is how eukaryotic cells created multicellularity. This is how we've gone from cooperating among families and clans to now we cooperate at the scale of a planet. As evolution proceeds, living things will increasingly coordinate their actions for the benefit of the group because it will be in their self-interest to do so. Cooperators will inherit the earth and eventually the universe. Now, when you think about how recently God created us, that is how recently we emerged out of the body of life, on a 100-year time scale, humans show up, interestingly enough, on Christmas Day of the 99th year, Homo habilis, handy humans, December 29th, Homo erectus, and December 31st, the 99 years, 364 days, the last day is we've got speaking, symbolic speaking humans. Okay? So this picture is not really so much a picture of a human being looking at the earth. I mean, you could say it that way, of course. But a more accurate way of talking about this picture is this is one of the first times that Earth became complex enough that a piece of itself could get off of itself and look back at itself. This is Earth looking in the mirror. See, we're not separate from nature. This is part of this nested emergence part. Humans are part of nature. The universe has been expanding and becoming more complex. And in us, the universe became complex enough that it could begin to contemplate its own nature. The universe as a whole has gone from simple atoms to more complex atoms, to molecules, to more complex molecules, to creatures, to more complex creatures, to societies and more complex societies. And it's one unfolding, emergent process that we grow out of. We emerge out of this process. A human being looking through a telescope is the universe looking at itself and just going, whoa. A biology student looking through a microscope is the planet Earth learning with awareness, with consciousness, how it's functioned unconsciously and instinctually for billions of years. Two of my favorite quotes, those of you that have heard me speak before know I love these quotes because I almost always use them. From Brian Swim, a cosmologist, he says, 4 billion years ago the Earth was molten rock and now it sings opera. Right? Earth was once molten rock and now it sings opera. And nobody put anything here. When the Bible, like Genesis 2:7, speaks of God forming us from the dust of the ground or breathing into us the breath of life, that's a true story. It's a mythic or night language way of describing the fact that we grow out of the dynamics of the planet itself, and it's the divine creative reality of the whole, God, reality as a whole, that made that possible. Now here's another quote from Brian Swim that I think you'll like, although this one's a little audacious. He tries to take the entire history of the universe and sum it up in 2 sentences. He says, you take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone, and it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. This is a profound understanding. In fact, Joanna Macy, one of my great sheroes, you like that word, shero? I like it. Yeah. Joanna Macy's got this great quote. She says, this shift, the shift from seeing ourselves as separate creatures that walk around on Earth in a universe to seeing ourselves as a mode of being of Earth, an expression of the universe. She said, this shift is essential to our survival because it can serve in lieu of morality and because moralizing is so ineffective. She says, sermons seldom hinder us from pursuing our self-interest. Right? Eric and I can preach till we're blue in the face, and you're going to do what's in your own perceived self-interest regardless of what comes from the pulpit. So Joanna Macy says we need to be a little more enlightened about what our self-interest is. For example, it would never occur to me to say to you, don't cut off your leg. No, really, don't cut off your leg, right? Because your leg's a part of you, right? And you know it. Well, Joanna Macy says, so are the trees in the Amazon basin. There are external lungs. And that's what we're waking up to, is that we are our world. And what we do to our world, we do to our larger body, we do to our larger self. Now, of course, this begs the question, if we're part of a larger body, what's our role? Is our role just to, basically be good consumers? I had a medical doctor one time, an oncologist, tell me that a cancer cell is a normal cell that, for a variety of reasons, gets cut off or disconnected from its genetic memory, and it starts to think it's separate from the body. And it lacks the guidance to live in a cooperative, harmonious way with the body, so it starts to consume the body of which it's a part, and of course, if cancer consumes enough of the body, it'll kill the body, but it kills itself. And then he asked this question, don't we call our society consumer society? What does to consume mean? It means to eat up. Why are we eating up the planet? Is it because we're bad, rotten, evil, crummy, sinful people? Or is it because, like the cancer cell, we thought we were separate from the earth? We thought our true home was somewhere else after we died. We didn't know that we were the universe becoming conscious of itself. And understanding this big history, this epic of evolution, is like being reconnected to billions of years of divine guidance and divine wisdom. I believe that our destiny as a species is to become like an immune system, where we protect and foster and defend the health and the well-being of the larger body of life of which we're a part. And humans will thrive in that kind of a world. And this isn't some pipe dream. In the next 30 to 50 years, we'll have the technology and the know-how to be able to deflect incoming intruders like asteroids, the things that have wreaked tremendous havoc. That's humans beginning to become an immune system within the body of life. And in my experience, this is a vision that young people can get behind. Because what I used to say as an environmental activist, my message used to be, we're going to hell in a handbasket, we better get our stuff together quick or the whole thing's going down. In my experience, that doesn't excite young people. Yet this vision that they and their generation worldwide, get to evoke. I mean, the interesting thing about this absolutely amazing thing that happened in Egypt is that young people worldwide are connecting with their generation. They're identifying with other young people their age worldwide, more than they are, in many cases, just their own nationality or their own religion. And Facebook and Twitter and technologies are helping this. Young people, I believe, in my experience, can get excited about helping humanity, playing a heroic role, helping humanity become like an immune system. That's a vision that can wake us all up excited. Now, I want to shift and talk about the gifts of chaos and death. I mentioned that all cultures have had ways of talking about history, our story, where we came from, why things are like they are, but also death and chaos. How do we understand this from an evidential standpoint? Now, I'm going to zip through this in about 7 or 8 minutes. But Connie, if you're interested, on this DVD set here, Connie spends an hour and 20 minutes where she takes a look at the major sciences that have anything to do with death. Paleontology, evolutionary biology, embryology, cell biology and ecology, astronomy and astrophysics, geology and geography and math. And then shows the major scientific discoveries in each of these areas that have helped us come to an understanding that there's not only nothing wrong with death, there's something profoundly right with death from an evolutionary perspective, from God's perspective. For example, if it weren't for the death of species, I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about the death of entire species, there would be no complex life on planet Earth beyond pond scum. Now, I've got nothing against pond scum. But when you compare it to the actual world we experience, this incredibly majestic world is possible only because of the death of whole species. 99% of the species that have been alive on Earth in the last 3.8 billion years of life are no longer here. And we wouldn't be here without the death of those species. If it weren't for the death of plants and animals, there would be no food. If it weren't for the death of mountains, there would not be healthy soil. Glaciers. Once we circumnavigated the globe, that is, once we had empirical proof that the world was finite, not infinite, you combine an understanding of a finite world with an understanding of population, and you realize very quickly, in a finite world, if you want a world of children, you have to have the death of elders. Because think about it, in a finite world, that's one of the reasons I loved the fact that you did that litany this morning. In a finite world, if all you've got is birth with no death, pretty soon you're wall-to-wall people, wall-to-wall skunks, wall-to-wall bacteria 60 feet deep. It doesn't take long. But my favorite example of the creative, sacred role of death is related to stars. If it weren't for the death of stars in red giants and supernova explosions, there would be no periodic table of elements. There would be no planets. There would be no life. I don't want anybody to get, stressed out here looking at the periodic table, right? But we now know where the chemical elements came from. In 1957, one of the most important papers of the 20th century was written. Fred Hoyle and several others they figured out how the chemical elements came into being. For example, at the beginning of time, what scientists call the Big Bang, what Connie and I call the Great Radiance, all the hydrogen and much helium was created. In fact, our star is a whole bunch of hydrogen becoming helium. That's what suns are. But inside red giant stars, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen are formed. At the end of our sun's life, in its dying phase, it will create carbon. It's not quite big enough to create nitrogen and oxygen. And then inside blue-white stars that have a supernova explosion, all the other elements of the periodic table of elements are formed. In fact, if you have any gold or silver or copper, if you're wearing any metals, those metals are formed at the instant of a collapsed supernova star. And we don't believe this. We know this. This is what every astrophysicist in the world would agree with. Death is natural and generative. It's creative at all levels of reality. To use night language, death is no less sacred than life. And what I mean by night language, well, I'll say a little bit more about that here in a minute. What I mean is poetic, evocative language. Until we grasp that death plays a vital and necessary role in an evolving cosmos, Christianity will continue to be shackled by unnatural, otherworldly notions of the gospel. Medical technologies will continue to prolong physical and emotional suffering and provoke family discord. And the medical industry will continue to underwrite the widening gap between the rich and the poor. Few things are more important than transforming how we view death. Now, in terms of chaos, I have a 15-foot string of beads. Each bead signifies some significant event in the universe story. And I have the major catastrophes, the major extinctions, the major violent, chaotic, destructive episodes. Because one of the things we now know, and again, I say know rather than believe, is that the main thing that for billions of years has catalyzed creativity and transformation is chaos, breakdowns, and bad news. It may be the most important thing. And see, knowing this builds my faith. Not faith as beliefs, but faith as trust. I trust the chaos of my life. I trust the chaos of our culture. I trust the chaos of our times because I have this deep time understanding, a knowledge-based understanding of the essential role of chaos and breakdowns in an evolving cosmos for emergent complexity to continue happening. This was me a year ago. I went through cancer treatment. And during this time, even when I thought I could die really soon, fortunately, I've had 2 CAT scans. I had a tumor the size of my fist removed from my spleen after 6 rounds of chemotherapy. And I have had 2 CAT scans since then, and they don't show any sign of cancer, so I'm very hopeful. But even when I looked at the possibility I could die really soon, I had nothing but trust. And it wasn't because I was holding out hope for pearly gates. I completely trust that whatever happens on the other side of death is just fine. That's true faith, is trusting. And I also had deepest gratitude for grace, 14 billion years of grace. So here's really the heart of what I want to talk about tonight, where I think most people find the transformation, although many people find the death material pretty powerful stuff, especially anybody who's been dealing with death, because this understanding of death doesn't take away the grief and pain of death, of course. But what it does is it gives it a cosmic container. We trust that humans aren't responsible for the existence of death in the universe, nor is it somehow a cosmic mistake. But here we talk about a knowledge-based understanding of human nature, specifically that we are hardwired for sociality, that we're meaning makers, and that we have mismatched instincts. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the practical benefits of an evolutionary worldview come blazingly into focus. To talk about us as being hardwired for sociality is to say that we're born to be social. Relationships are us. We're group animals, and like all other group animals, this is where the pro-social emotions and pro-social behaviors come into being. Love, compassion, generosity, care, consideration, kindness. These pro-social feelings and behaviors come into being because of our group nature. Thank you. Anybody who says that evolution just says we're all selfish doesn't understand this essential aspect of evolution. I love this picture. It's one of my favorite images of all time. Evolutionary psychology and evolutionary brain science, together with primatology, the study of primates and humans cross-culturally, have helped us come to an understanding that there's certain things that are universal to apes and humans. One of the things that we now discover is that moral behavior emerges naturally. We don't need a cosmic carrot and a cosmic stick to motivate us to be good. Moral behavior emerges. We are fundamentally empathic. That is, empathy and compassion is instinctual for 98% of us. Roughly 2% of the human species is born without the mental capacity to feel empathy and compassion. Some forms of autism, sociopaths, psychopaths, they lack the mental capacity. They literally can't feel empathy and compassion. But for the other 98% of us, it's instinctual. So to speak about us being meaning makers, that we're storytellers, is to say that we're always interpreting. We can't not interpret. And we use metaphors. We use what I called earlier night language. There's a distinction that I make in my book between day language, which is reflecting our daytime experience. It's just descriptive. It's what science specializes in, descriptive day language. And then night language, a language of poetry, of myth, of symbol, it's evocative. Night language touches our heart, engages our emotions, but it's also trivialized if you interpret it literally. And we all have a daytime experience and a nighttime experience, and as we all know, they're very different. We do things at night in our dreams that we just can't do during the day. You know, we fly, we do all kinds of things. And yet when you fly in your dreams, you're not having a supernatural experience. You're having an experience that's common to the day, to the night experience, to the dream state. Okay? Even though if you took it literally, it would be supernatural. And so all cultures have used a blend of day and night language to describe the nature of reality and our relationship to it. That is to say that all cultures have entered relationship. Because of our relational nature, we relate to reality. We personify. There's not a single culture anywhere in the world that hasn't personified either reality as a whole or some significant aspect of reality. That's what our brains do naturally. As I mentioned during one of the church services today, it's not like God has a multiple personality disorder, that we have all these different stories of different gods and goddesses saying and doing different things around the world. These are personifications of what's fundamentally real. We live in an infinitely meaningful universe. Anybody who says there's only one meaning to something doesn't understand the nature of human consciousness, the nature of human language. We live in an infinitely meaningful universe. So let's not fight and kill each other over the one meaning. Let's find what are inspiring meanings that can bring us together and help us work together for a common, sustainable future. We simply cannot not interpret our experience. That's from the Matrix, by the way. And our individual and collective interpretations profoundly affect the quality of our lives and our societies. As I shared earlier today, I wish that every young person would develop the skill, like exercise the muscle of interpreting life generously. Because the primary determinant of the quality of your life isn't what happens to you, it's how you interpret what happens to you. And of course, political spin is what collective interpretation is all about. The fate of nations can be impacted by how we collectively interpret. Now, to speak about instincts, many people think of evolution as just, what happened in the distant past, or, like what's happening up there, out there, the galaxies and stuff. They don't realize that there's profound emotional and practical benefits of an evolutionary worldview. For example, you can have compassion for self and others in ways that's really difficult without understanding what's going on under the hood. We can move beyond denial, guilt, and resentment. Healing broken relationships becomes almost a no-brainer. And we can develop a witness capacity. So let's talk about how we can get to these core benefits from an evolutionary understanding of our nature. Now, to talk about brain science, we now have the technology that allows us to see how the human brain is working while it's in the process of working. While somebody's thinking about their best friend or their worst enemy, or somebody they're fantasizing about, or something they had for lunch today. We can map out which parts of the brain are being used, where the blood flows are, where the neurons are firing. And one of the things that we have is a very clear understanding that our brain does not show evidence that it was designed by an all-knowing, supreme intelligent designer outside the universe that knew exactly how to design the perfect brain for humans to thrive in the world that we today have to live in. What our brain shows tremendous evidence of is that it was created by God, to use religious language, or you could say it evolved, it emerged over millions of years in an additive sort of way. There's the most ancient part of our brain, more recent still, and then the most recent part of our brain. The reptilian brain is the brain stem and the cerebellum. This is the part of the brain that's concerned with the basics of physical survival. You could say that the reptilian part of the brain really only cares about the 3 S's: safety, sustenance, and sex. Or you could say what the reptilian brain is really good at are the 5 F's. Fight, flight, freeze, food, and copulate. Come on, I'm in a church. What do you expect? The old mammalian brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, this is that gray part. This is the part of the brain that's concerned with the basics of emotional survival, social survival. It's all about feelings, emotions, bonding, kinship. Status is very important to mammals in the way that it's not with reptiles. Also play. You don't find reptiles playing in the way that you find all mammals playing. The neocortex, the new mammalian brain, only 2 new drives come into being with the neocortex. The drive to comprehend and the drive to predict. Now think about it. Comprehend and predict for what? Like, why would evolution produce an organ that was really good at comprehending and predicting? So the reptilian brain and the old mammalian brain can get what they want more effectively. It's why we are masters of self-deception. We are brilliant at rationalizing. Because I can deceive you just so much more effectively if I've already deceived myself. Makes sense of some of our experience, right? And then, of course, the most advanced part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is the part, or sometimes called the frontal lobes. This is the part of the brain that's concerned with good judgment or poor judgment. It's the last to develop in young people. It only fully develops between the age of 23 to 25. See, parents know this. Car insurance companies know this. Because one of the things we know about testosterone, which is generated at the reptilian part of the brain, right? It's about sex, right? Is that the higher the testosterone in men and women both, the more risk-taking occurs. So if you get young men, they don't have good judgment, this part of the brain isn't fully developed, but they've got a lot of testosterone, it's not a surprise that men under the age of 25 are so much more expensive to insure. In fact, I don't even think you can rent a car if you're under 25 and a man. Now, this is pretty much standard day language. This is the way that any scientist or neurobiologist would talk about this. But Connie and I discovered about 5 or 6 years ago that if you want young people, like high school students and college students, and especially grade school kids, to think this stuff is cool and to talk to their peers about it, day language just ain't going to cut it. You need some night language to help you out. So we've created some night language animals to help us out here. So we've got our lizard legacy, our furry little mammal, our monkey mind, and our higher porpoise. So again, the lizard legacy is safety, sexuality, survival, the basics of survival and reproduction. The furry little mammal is feelings, emotions, bonding, kinship, status, and play. Also, notice that there's a demarcation there. One of the things that I'm trying to get at is it's not all warm fuzzies. There's something potentially very dangerous that happens in that part of the brain. It's called in-group, out-group mentality. See, we love and care and cooperate with our kind of people, but we can demonize and hate them, right? Now, of course, we got stories doing the same thing. Virtually every culture in the world has a sacred story that tells you why to behave very differently with the in-group than the out-group. Okay, I'm gonna say something because it's common to our tradition, but I'm not picking on any one group of people. Please hear this. This is true worldwide. But since we're part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, commandment number 6, who did that apply to? Other Hebrews, right? It was okay to wipe out the Philistines, right? 20 million Canaanites, destroy them all, thus saith the Lord. Now again, I'm not picking on the Jews or the Hebrews, but this is what's going on in this part of the brain. The monkey mind is a term that comes out of Buddhism. The monkey jumps from branch to branch, eats a little fruit, eats a little fruit. It's like a rational verbal part of the brain. Right? We're rarely in the present moment for very long. Did you ever realize? We're thinking about the past, right? We're worried about the future. It's one of the reasons our meditation and mindfulness practices are designed to take that ongoing meaning-making monkey mind and help it stay in the present moment a little bit more often. And then, of course, our higher porpoise is our sense of higher purpose. It's our sense of God's will, our higher power. In fact, if you ask somebody who's hooked up to a functional MRI machine to think about their marriage vows or what they're most committed to, this is the part of the brain that's stimulated. My editor, who lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we're actually going to be seeing her in a few days. We were staying at her house a few years ago, and she just said this thing off the top of her head, and we were like, Connie and I were like, wait, stop, you got to write that down, that's great. She said, therapy as it now exists is permeated with the assumption that the issues people struggle with arise out of their personal histories. It's not that this assumption is wrong, but very often, the issues we struggle with are the same ones our ancestors, both human and pre-human, have struggled with for millions of years. Many people go to therapy because of a vague feeling of discontent that cannot be articulated because in reality it springs from a pre-verbal ancient source. Our old mammalian brain, our furry little mammal, freaks out if it doesn't have a burrow and someone furry to cuddle with. No amount of talking can take away this brain's sadness and dis-ease if these conditions are not satisfied. If you live alone, the real solution is to save the money you would have spent on therapy trying to discover some painful childhood memory and bring a furry mammal into your life. Most typically a cat or dog, the furry mammal who cuddles with you and can fulfill a need that all of our ancestors have had far back into the distant past. The attachment that people feel to their animal companions is often mistaken for anthropomorphism, but it's actually the other way around. Cats and dogs have the same fur little mammal brain that we do, and these brains understand each other. As Richard Dawkins explains in his book Ancestor's Tale, cats, dogs, and humans share a common ancestor 85 million years ago. We all hail from the same bloodline, Laurasiathir. Late at night, Fatima the cat and I snuggle next to the fire in my cozy brick burrow, and I know deep down that all is right with the world. Isn't that great? Just the other night, there was a woman that shared that animals have kept her alive. Now, Connie has puppets that she uses when we talk about our brain science to first, second, third graders. Now, obviously, when we talk about the lizard legacy to first and second graders, we don't talk about sex. We just talk about safety and sustenance. And you know when you feel stressed out? It's true for about 90% of us, okay? Not everybody, but it's true for the vast majority of us. When you feel stressed out, you just find yourself walking over to the refrigerator. You open up the freezer, you take out the ice cream, and you think to yourself, no bowl needed. Right? Because for 99% of human history, and for a fact for our mammalian history, if you were stressed out, you might need a lot of energy. You didn't know when you were going to eat again. So eating when you feel stressed out makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, our monkey mind is always trying to figure things out, right? Well, Connie did a program for first and second graders at a Unitarian Universalist church during Sunday school, right? And this about a month later, this little boy, a first grade boy, comes home from school and says to his mother, she sent us an email, which is how we learned this. He says, Mommy, we had a fire drill at school today. Now try to remember your first fire drill ever. This kid's first fire drill in his entire life, right? This is a big deal. So she says, well, tell me, what was it like? He said, the sirens were all blaring and we all had to go out to the street. And I told myself, monkey mind, calm down. Lizard legacy, you're not hungry. Monkey mind, calm down. Lizard legacy, you're not hungry? This is a first grader. And the amazing thing is, who's doing the witnessing? See, even though this part of the brain doesn't fully develop until the age of 23 to 25, it was enough developed in this first grader, because that's where the witness capacity happens, here at the prefrontal cortex. So why instincts? There's two main reasons why instincts can cause us such challenges. The first is called mismatched theory. The other is supernormal stimuli. So let's take a look at these and let's see how they enlighten some of our own experience. Understanding the fact that our instincts aren't matched to the world that we today have to live in. Our instincts match a world in which our ancestors used to live in. And our instincts are designed to help us survive and reproduce in a world that we don't even live in anymore. And understanding that mismatch can go a long way towards helping us to understand some of the things that we find challenging and problematic about ourselves and each other. Now, one of the things that I think is gospel, saving good news from a deep time, from an evolutionary perspective. You know, you got the gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Here's what God has been revealing through science, through evidence, that I think is saving good news, and I think you will too, is when we can move beyond denial or condemnation to appreciate the fact that we all have inherited proclivities. We all have an unchosen nature. In other words, we have aspects of ourselves that we didn't choose. We just find ourselves this way for really good reasons. For example, we all have cravings for sugar, salts, and fats. Why is that? Well, it's because for 99% of human history, it wasn't easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. So having a craving for those things allowed our ancestors to survive long enough to reproduce. Yet today, it's really easy to find sugar, salts, and fats. There's a mismatch. There's not one of us in this room that would be alive today, not one of us would be alive today if some of our ancestors weren't really, really good at putting on weight and holding on to that weight through the harsh winters, through the droughts, through the lean times. In fact, humans that couldn't do that got lost to the gene pool. And guess what, folks? Our ancestors were so generous, they passed those genes on to us. It's our unchosen nature. I mentioned before about testosterone, right? Not only in men and women does risk-taking rise when we have higher levels of testosterone, but people obsess more about sex. People think more about sexual issues and sexual situations. In fact, you can induce that in people that you just give them some more testosterone. We stayed with a woman and her husband in California, and she said that 4 years earlier, her doctor had put her on hormonal therapy, on testosterone patches, and she said after 2 days, she said, I couldn't stop thinking about sex. She said, Is this what guys have to deal with? Well, the answer is yes, it is actually. But it's not just guys. See, women also have testosterone, and some women have a lot more of it than others. Now, typically, men have 20 to 50 times the testosterone that women do. That's 2,000 to 5,000% more. But some women have a lot of testosterone. In fact, my daughter is life's ever-present reminder to me that there's a wisdom larger than my ego at work. I was a peace activist for much of my adult life. Guess what my oldest daughter does in the world? She's a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. Not only that, but my daughter is the second woman in U.S. history to be on the all-Marine wrestling team. That's right, my baby girl wrestles for the Marine Corps and kicks butt. And her pacifist daddy is so damn proud of her. And I'm excited to report that 2.5 months ago, she gave birth to my firstborn grandchild, so I'm a happy camper. I'm going to show you 3 pictures that were emailed to me that I hope they don't offend anybody. It's typical male behavior. This is a statue of a buffalo and a real adolescent male moose. Here we have typical male behavior, right? Now, the person who emailed this to me said, is this statutory rape? Or is it merely a moose demeanor? I know, pretty bad, right? Now, the interesting thing is, as status rises, so does testosterone. And this is true for men and women both, but it's true for all men, gay and straight, but it's only true for about half women. So it's not true for all women. What this means, among other things, is that when we get elected into public office, or become a megachurch pastor, or a sports star, right? In fact, wasn't it Henry Kissinger who said the greatest aphrodisiac of all is power? Right. Now, I need to be understood, or I need to make sure I'm not misunderstood. I'm not justifying these guys. I'm not excusing them. But I will say this. To my knowledge, they're all Christians. They all believe in the fall of Adam and Eve. They believe in original sin. But having a mythic night language concept that you believe in and understanding that night language in a factual, natural day language way are two very different things. One can give a whole lot more freedom than the other. What this means, among other things, is that we can expect to encounter difficulty with self and others, in part because we have deeper competing drives that often have their own agenda. Now, I need to make sure that I'm not misunderstood here. I'm not saying that those on the conservative end of the spectrum get to say, the devil made me do it. And those of us on the more liberal end of the spectrum get to say, my lizard legacy made me do it. No, I'm not saying that. Because it may not be your fault, but it is absolutely your responsibility. It's each of our responsibility. Nobody gets off the hook. This doesn't make it easier to be out of integrity for men or anybody else. In fact, in my experience, it makes it infinitely easier to stay in integrity. When the New York Times Magazine did a feature article on my book about 3.5 years ago, they interviewed this gentleman from northern Florida who came to my program, and he comes up to me. I did the brain science stuff during that church service, and he comes up to me afterwards, and he's practically vibrating. The guy's so excited. He says, Michael, he said, I got to tell you something I've never told anybody. Now remember, he's 80 years old. And I don't know about you, but when somebody who's 80 years old is going to tell me something they'd never told anybody, I'm all ears. I was like, please tell me. He said, in 1973, he said, I became the vice president of my corporation. Now, it turns out this was a huge corporation. This was a major rise in status. Okay? He said, I never understood why my life began unraveling almost immediately until your sermon. He said, I had been married for 13 years. He said, I'd never betrayed my wife. In fact, to be honest, I'd never been seriously tempted. But within 6 months of my promotion, he said, I had 5 affairs. None of them knew about each other. My wife didn't know about any of them. He said, it ultimately cost me my marriage. It cost me my job. And he said, I've been living with the guilt and the shame of this for 35 years. He said, I haven't told anybody until I'm telling you right now. And the amazing thing is, he was telling me loud enough that about 6 of his parishioner friends could hear him. The shame was gone. In fact, he told me, he said, it feels like I can let go the boatloads of self-judgment and start cleaning things up. And to his credit, he did. Between Sunday morning, which is when I did the sermon, and Tuesday night, which is when I did the evening program like I'm doing here, he called his ex-wife. He hadn't talked to her in like 8 or 9 years. He said, I was in tears. He said, I apologize for being such a deceptive, lying sack, came back to integrity. To use Christian night language, he came back to Christ. He came back to integrity. And I found out 3 months later from his roommate that his depression of the last 15 years had lifted. He wasn't even on the medication anymore. Now, he wasn't a Christian. He was an atheist. This was at a Unitarian Universalist church. But he said, it feels like I've had a born-again experience. He says, it feels like I've had a new lease on life, and here I am 81 years old. Now, to speak about supernormal stimuli, there's a book that came out a few years ago called Supernormal Stimuli by Deirdre Barrett. The subtitle is How Primal Urges Overran Their Evolutionary Purpose. Folks, in case it's not obvious, this is not food. You'll never find anything like that in the natural world. It's a concentration of food-like items that we are evolutionarily programmed to want and to want more of. In fact, Deirdre Barrett says almost everyone will overeat if dining on supernormal stimuli. This is an oyster catcher, but this is what I'm about to say is true of many, many different kinds of birds. If you replace many birds' eggs with an egg that's ceramic or wooden, it can be grotesque. But if it's larger and a brighter blue or a brighter color, right, and bigger polka dots, it will always sit on the fake egg. It will ignore its own eggs, and its own eggs will just die. And it will never learn. It always does it. Never learns. It's supernormal stimuli. Bees will become addicted to cocaine. Roundworms will become addicted to nicotine. I love this quote. The most dangerous aspect of our modern diet arises from our ability to refine food. This is the link to drug, alcohol, and tobacco addiction. Coca doesn't give South American Indians health problems when they brew or chew it. No one's ruined his life eating poppy seeds. When grapes and grains were fermented lightly and occasionally, they presented a healthy pleasure, not a hazard. Salt, fat, sugar, and starch are not harmful in their natural contexts. It's our modern ability to concentrate things like cocaine, heroin, alcohol, and food components that turns them into a menace that our bodies are hardwired to crave. I mean, think about it. What was there to be addicted to 10,000 years ago? Were you going to run into some fermented berries? Hard liquor wasn't even invented until 300 years ago. And yet today, we've got all these activities and substances, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, video games, shopping, internet pornography, romance novels. There's so much that's so easy to be addicted to today. There was a woman who sent us this email. She said, I could never understand my crazy, destructive drives, why I ate so much when I was full, and why I fell in love with the wrong men. But with an understanding of evolution, it now all makes sense. In fact, let me say something about why women occasionally fall in love with the wrong men. When women who are in their fertile childbearing years, okay, so this is not true for all women, but this is true for about 85% of women. When women who are past puberty and before menopause, when they're in their fertile childbearing years, when they are in the presence of a very high status male, the women's testosterone levels will go sky high. Sometimes it'll double or triple or quadruple. Meaning they're going to take greater risks, they're going to think more about sex. In fact, they've done these studies where they have women talking to senators, right? And they're clearly being more flirtatious. But if you ask them, are you being more flirtatious? They'll deny it. But if you show them a videotape, they are embarrassed because it was obvious that they're being more flirtatious. In fact, I did a very large, prestigious church outside of Philadelphia, one of the largest, most prestigious Presbyterian churches in the country. And there was a woman, an attractive woman, that waited until everybody else left. And then she came up and she talked to me. And she said, Michael, thank you for talking about women's testosterone levels around high-status men. Because you just made sense of something that happened to me 13 years ago. This is a few years ago. She told me this story. She said, I had 2 young kids at the time, and I was living in one of the wealthiest sections of Philadelphia, and Bill Clinton's motorcade went right past my house. The windows were down. I could see him. She said, and this wave washed over me. And I realized that had he stopped, I would have had to given myself to him. And she said, and I was a happily married woman. I love this one. The universe becomes self-conscious. Eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce, eat, survive, reproduce. What's it all about? And we wonder why we occasionally struggle with issues related to food safety and sex. I mean, duh. It takes a lot of courage in this culture to walk into a group of strangers and say, hi, my name is Michael, I'm an overeater. Or, hi, my name is Michael, I'm a sex addict, or I'm a gambling addict, or I'm a codependent. What's true is, hi, my name is Michael, and I'm a human being with mismatched instincts surrounded by supernormal stimuli. Guess what, folks? That's true for you, too. It's true for all of us. It's not just the addicts and the codependents among us. It's true for all of us. And this removes the stigma. Oh, I love this one. The parable of the pickle jar. Halsey Barlow is my wife's niece. Now, Halsey grew up in a very conservative Roman Catholic family. Her mother and father listened to Rush Limbaugh every day. And she went to nursing school, and she had to write a paper on Madagascan lemurs. And she had this epiphany. She said, I saw how beautiful evolution was. Right? And then she started reading books, like Bob Wright's book, The Moral Animal. I know you've had him here. He's a dear friend of mine, and we love his books. But this one here, The Moral Animal, he wrote in 1994. The subtitle is Why We Are the Way We Are, the New Science of Evolutionary Psychology. Even though it was written 16 years ago, it's still one of the best introductions to evolutionary psychology. Well, then she sent us this email. We call it The Parable of the Pickle Jar. She said, I now put everything into an evolutionary context. It's almost become a reaction that when I encounter a situation, I think, okay, why am I feeling this way? How and why would my 780th great-grandmother react to this? It doesn't even have to be anything significant. For instance, if I see one of my roommates snacking out of my jar of pickles, I get this feeling in my stomach like, hey, back off, those are mine, mine, mine. I want to be laid back and not care, but my instincts are so darn uptight. But knowing that I'm a selfish, status-seeking hornball only motivates me to do things that say, F you to my evolutionary roots, even though I really do love them. I absolutely love how imperfect and clumsy we are as humans. I mean, almost any situation can be laughed off if we only step back and took a look at why we feel the way we do. I love it. I wouldn't want it any other way. Now, is that extraordinary for an 18-year-old? And again, even though this part of the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 23 to 25, it was enough developed in this 18-year-old because that's where the witness capacity happens. Now, there's a whole lot more that I could say about humans' male and female similarities and differences that make profound sense from an evolutionary perspective. And of course, it plays out over a bell curve. It's not like all men are this way or all women are that way. That's not true. But it does play out over the bell curve. And the only thing I'm going to say right now is that the best self-help book that Connie and I have ever discovered from a solid evolutionary psychology, evolutionary brain science perspective is this book here, You Still Don't Understand, Typical Differences Between Men and Women and How to Resolve Them. It's fabulous for heterosexual couples. Now, one of the theological things I'm going to say tonight, in fact, one of the only theological things I'm going to say, is that this perspective untrivializes. It realizes or naturalizes ancient mythic insights and ancient night language, such as the fall of Adam and Eve and original sin. For example, prior to microscopes, prior to the ability to even see bacteria, it wasn't just difficult to understand infection, it was impossible to understand infection. Prior to telescopes, before we could even see that there were other galaxies, it wasn't just difficult to understand the large-scale structure of the universe, it was completely impossible. Well, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, it wasn't difficult to understand our evolved brain, it was completely impossible. But what you would have understood is what we all know through our experience, which is we all say, I'll do that, but we don't. We say, I'll never do that, but we do. We say, you can count on me for that, but they couldn't. What's that about? Well, the fall of Adam and Eve, original sin, are spot-on, accurate night language about what we can now speak about in a natural, factual, day language way. I think the Apostle Paul, in our tradition, I'm going to assume most of us are Christians in this room, I think the Apostle Paul probably said it best. He said, I'm a slave to sin. I really don't understand myself. I have the desire to do what is good, but I don't do it. What I end up doing is not the good I want to do, but what I hate to do. What a wretched man am I. What's this picture of? Yeah, this is the Wizard of Oz. See, and does anybody know what Toto represents? Toto represents evidence. Evidence is pulling the curtain back on the great and terrible Oz. And we're starting to see natural processes, natural understandings that are making sense of these large-scale mythic concepts. And again, it's not dissing religion, it's helping religions evolve. I believe that the major religious trend of the 21st century is the shift from religious unnaturalism, where we interpret all of our understandings in an unnatural, what sometimes gets called supernatural, but it's also unnatural way, to religious naturalism. And my hunch is that most of us in this room are religious naturalists. We just never heard the term. If you value evidence as divine communication, you're probably a religious naturalist. If you interpret the mythic language in our tradition in a non-literal, metaphorical way, you're probably a religious naturalist. Now, here's the other theological thing I'm going to say tonight, is that this understanding of big history, this understanding of nest, completely dissolves the theist-atheist debate. Completely just dissolves it. Because theism and atheism are both belief-based concepts. They're not knowledge-based concepts, they're belief-based. Theism, I believe in God. Atheism, I don't believe in God. We're moving beyond belief to evidence, to knowledge. A nested view of reality transcends belief or disbelief. Could you imagine how absurd it would be if somebody came up to you and said, excuse me, ma'am, do you believe in life? How about you, sir? Do you believe in the universe? It doesn't matter whether we believe in life or whether we believe in the universe, right? We're part of life. We're an expression of life. We're part of the universe. Now, what somebody says about life, that is believable or not. Somebody can say, life is so kind and wonderful. Somebody else says, life sucks, it's terrible. Well, that's believable or not, depending upon your experience and your interpretation. But the fact of life just is. It doesn't matter whether we believe in reality or not. Reality is something that every plant, every animal, and every human being cannot not experience, inwardly and outwardly. That's why I love this next quote from Philip K. Dick. He says, reality is that which when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. And from an evolutionary perspective, when I use the word God, that's what I'm pointing to, is fundamental reality. God is mythic proper name for reality. You could say God is reality's mythic name, or reality is God's secular name. Either way. God is meaningful night language. Said another way, God is a personification, not a person. God is trivialized when we think of God literally as a person, which is not to say that personal metaphors aren't useful. They are. But if we literalize them, we've just trivialized the divine. It's one of the reasons why the Jewish tradition didn't allow for, even using the name of God. All images, because then they become idols. Okay, I'm going to say the same thing in religious language and secular language. And you tell me whether you think this is accurate or not. Because you can use both, day language or night language. You can't understand how God or reality created complex life if you don't understand extinctions. You can't understand how God or reality created healthy soil if you don't understand glaciers. You can't understand how reality or God created the periodic table of elements or planets or life if you don't understand red giants and supernova explosions. Watch this picture. You certainly can't understand how God or reality created the mountains, the oceans, and the continents if you don't understand plate tectonics. Folks, we've only known this since 1964. You could say God only revealed it to us in 1964. And we don't believe that the Atlantic Ocean is growing at the same rate your fingernails grow. We know it. We've got the satellites to measure exactly how fast the Atlantic Ocean is growing and how fast the Pacific Ocean is shrinking. Evidence is the main way reality speaks. Evidence is our main source of divine guidance today. That's why I'm going to repeat something that I said during one of the church services this morning. I love the phrase in the United Church of Christ, God is still speaking, comma. You know, with the emphasis on the comma, but I'd love to see that sentence, finished. God is still speaking, comma, and facts are God's native tongue, exclamation point. That's why I'd love to see ministers preaching, not only from the Bible, but also from Science News or from, Science Times. And I understand that Eric does that. Without knowing the truth about death, our history, and our nature, we can't help but trivialize God. I mentioned a little bit of this morning and during the second church service. We should have known this. St. Thomas Aquinas, 750 years ago, said a mistake about creation will necessarily result in a mistake about God. Now, what that means, among other things, is the more we learn about the nature of creation, the nature of the universe, if we're not updating what we mean when we use the word God, we may have definitions and understandings of God that are so outdated they're no longer life-giving. For example, if you take a straightforward literalist reading of the ethic, the morality of the Old Testament, you'd be forced to conclude that the morality of the Old Testament can be summed up in one sentence: obey the Lord or die. In the New Testament, it's believe in Jesus or fry. And yet, as I shared during the church service today, our own government defines terrorism this way. The United States Department of Defense defines terrorism as the calculated use of violence or the threat of violence to inculcate fear, intended to coerce or intimidate others in the pursuit of goals that are generally religious, political, or ideological. Now, we all know, those of us that use God language, that God can't possibly be a cosmic terrorist. Yet that's where literalism takes us. In fact, P.Z. Myers is the world's most widely read blogger. 60,000 people a day read his blog. He's a very out atheist. Here's a direct quote. He says, there's no surer way to make an atheist than to get them to actually read Scripture. This is the kind of stuff he points to. Every time in the Bible, or the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, or any other sacred text, wherever it says God said this, or God did that, what follows is always necessarily an interpretation. It's an interpretation of what some person or group of people thought or felt or wished or were hoping that reality, and it's how they interpreted what reality was saying or doing. In other words, if CNN were there covering it for the nightly news, right, there would be no disembodied voice coming from the sky. These are interpretations. And if we fail to understand this, we will belittle the very notion of God, and we're surely going to miss what reality is saying and doing today. That's why one of the most effective forms of Bible study is every time that the Bible says God said this, ask yourself the question, what person or group of people wanted or how they interpreted reality to be able to saying that? Because if we don't do that, we're not going to see God speaking through evidence today. So again, coming back to this slide, our knowledge, our evidential understanding of big history, death and chaos, and human nature, I suggested can give us an inspiring vision of humanity's future. And what I mean by this is that we are going through, I believe that humanity is going through what all of us as individuals go through. All of us as individuals have gone from where we thought, we were basically belief-centered. Kids are sponges for belief. We'll believe anything. But then as healthy adults, we start questioning those beliefs, right? And then as healthy adults, we realize that our guidance comes not from just what was told to us, but from evidence, our own experience, and the experience of others outside our in-group. This is the shift from religious unnaturalism to religious naturalism. And then finally, we've all gone from where we thought we were the center of the universe to where we realized that how we will be remembered by history is determined by our legacy, what contribution that we offer to the world. And humanity is going through that. Humanity was guided by beliefs for most of human history. Now we're starting to be guided by evidence. And humanity, all cultures, thought that the world was made for us. And what we're now realizing is that we were made for the world. No matter what our attempts to inform, it is our ability to inspire that will turn the tides. Now, I'm almost 6'1", okay? These guys are tall. The guy on the left is John Mather. He's NASA's senior astrophysicist. He's the 2006 Nobel Prize winner in physics. The guy on the right is Craig Mello. He's the 2006 Nobel Prize winner in medicine and physiology. The reason that they invited me to the Library of Congress is that they were both doing a program together there called The Origins and Evolution of Life in the Universe. And Craig, the guy on the right, sent me an email. He said, Michael, you got to come to the Library of Congress and get your picture taken with us. He said, it'll be great for your book. I was in Phoenix at the time. I flew from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. I thought it was a great idea. Here's what they said about my book. John Mather said, the universe took 13.7 billion years to produce this amazing book. I hardly recommend it. Folks, as an author, it just don't get any better than that. Craig Mello said, the science versus religion debate is over. A must read for all, including scientists. Now, unfortunately, this hasn't gotten me on Oprah, right? But you know how when you go to movies and before the feature film, they have movie trailers, movie clips? We created an 80-second book trailer. I wanted to share it with you. So you've heard a lot from me. I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts in terms of what, if anything, did you find helpful, interesting, or inspiring? And then also, what difference do you think it would make if more people held a deep time view of death and chaos, big history, and human nature?